Hello, everybody, and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results Wednesday Facebook Live. And I'm so happy to have my wonderful friend and fellow speaker trainer, John Ball, as my guest today. So, John, welcome to Speakers Who Get Results.
Hello, Elizabeth. Always happy to be talking with you.
Well, this is a sort of a double dose of John because the interview that I recorded with him is now live on my podcast. So the podcast of Presenting for Influence with John Ball. And what I want to do is I'm going to ask you some of the things that I never got a chance to ask you when I interviewed you. And some of the things that are also, some things have happened since we actually recorded that interview. The official bio is that John teaches full-time presentation skills for business owners who want to present themselves, represent their brand, and stand out as charismatic leaders. He's trained in many different styles of coaching and hypnosis. For several years, John has been working with T. Harv Eker and his son Jesse Eker, coaching one-on-one and groups, and teaching online courses from financial freedom to making money from online training. In his own business, Present Influence, or John, I've always think of it as Present Influence, but is it also Present Influence?
That's a really good question. And the answer is yes to both. It was intentional. It was intentional that it could be both of them for those for the hidden meaning kind of thing, yes. Okay,
so in his own business, which is either Present Influence or Present Influence, he works with business owners who want or need to represent their business and brand, and frankly, don't want to suck at it. He also works with speakers who want to learn how to be more influential and how to create back-end products and services to make passive income through teaching. John is the Vice President of Education for his local Toastmasters chapter in Valencia, Spain, and also President for Valencia in the Global Business Owners Network. He will soon be reaching the Success Books Review channel on YouTube. Actually, John, is that live now, your YouTube channel?
Well, my YouTube channel is live, but it pretty much is the stuff that I post on LinkedIn and my podcast episodes. Sometimes I've kind of incorporated the book reviews into that, so they're on there. But I am actually thinking of still planning to launch a separate podcast that's just going to be short form, maybe 5 minutes or so, business book reviews for business books, personal development, that kind of thing.
Well, I know that you've got all sorts of really fun, interesting book reviews on LinkedIn Live, and sometimes I look at that and I think, no, I won't have time. I won't have time.
I know. I work with a lot of clients around the world, both in group coaching programs and one-to-one. And one of the things they always know they can come to me for is book recommendations, because I consume books at quite a heavy pace, especially personal development books, anything to do with training, public speaking, all those kinds of things, influence and persuasion books. You know, you can almost guarantee I've either got it or it's on my reading list. Yeah.
Okay, well, good. Well, I wanted to ask you, there's two things I want to talk about: how you engage audience, because that's one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately. First is humor. And I want to get your description of why it's important to use humor when you are presenting.
Well, in my own podcast, I've been doing a series on humor and presentations, and you know that my podcast is a lot about presentation skills and the tools of influence and persuasion. And generally when you read books about tools of influence and persuasion, you don't often hear comedy and humor talked about as being a tool of influence and persuasion, and yet it is. And in my opinion, is one of the strongest ones as well. And because essentially when people laugh, when people are laughing hopefully along with you rather than at you, but when people are laughing when you're presenting or you're on the stage or entertaining in some kind of way, it's a signal that they also like you and they trust you. And so I don't think really that laughter comes without having some of that, because if people don't like you, then they're not going to laugh no matter what you do.
You know, it's a great tool for connection and for easing the tension. So if you
Yeah.
can get people to laugh. And of course, as we're talking, I'm in Austria, you're in Spain, and we both work with people from around the world. So you also have to make sure that you have something funny to say that will be funny to your audience. Or
Hopefully. And I think the goal is, with humor, just to, in my opinion, be a bit playful. I mean, that's always a good start, and don't need to have too many things prepared for that. But there are rules to humor. There are things that will nearly always get a laugh, and there are sort of standard speaker jokes. But I think anything, sometimes even just telling a story that has been very entertaining, or that is, often we use stories in our social lives anyway. Sometimes we can adapt those stories for more public consumption if we need to adapt them, and they can still be very funny and very entertaining. And so there are many different ways that we can be humorous and entertaining and engaging. But I
yeah.
think a lot of it does come with having that connection, as you say, and being very present with the people who we have in our audience.
Well, you know, the wonderful speaker, Kelly Swanson, is saying, she says, don't be funny, be fun. And I really liked that. But I was listening to her today. So I should say, on the podcast Speakers Who Get Results, tomorrow's episode that publishes tomorrow is about humor with Kelly Swanson. So I'm very glad to be able to do that. Can you tell us a little bit more about how do you sharpen your humor muscles, if you will? Strengthen your humor muscles, I guess.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think most of us know how to be funny with our friends. And one of the reasons why I started doing a series on humor in my own podcast was because in public speaking, I think it's an area that people tend to shy away from, and think that they can't do it or they don't know how to do it. But like anything, you have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone. And most people who will do speaking in some way, shape, or form are very used to stepping out of their comfort zone. Like the very act of public speaking or presenting, for most people, at least initially, is stepping out of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully at some point it starts to become within your comfort zone. But comedy is often something that people consider very outside of that, or they just don't think that they're naturally funny. And you don't have to be. It's not about getting up on stage and delivering like your 5-minute set of anecdotes or jokes and one-liners or anything like that. It can just be about telling a story that has a bit of a funny ending in it, or it can just be a few sort of humorous bits. And a lot of it comes from your attitude as well, I think. So if you are being, as you said about Kelly saying about be fun, yeah, so be playful, be fun with your audience, and sometimes you'll get lost just from that. And the more you do it, the more you are willing to be flexible with this, and be adaptable, and maybe even just try improv a few times. Maybe not on your own shows or talks, and it's not always the best place to start your riffing, but try a few improv classes if you can, or read a few books on improv and give it a go and start introducing it. With anything we do, the more we do it, the easier it gets. And improv is one of those things that you get better at the more you practice it. Even though
Yep.
we think it should all be spontaneous, it's really not. It's stuff that we get practiced into ways of thinking and adaptability that we can transfer into different situations to make them funny.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Is that learning how to roll with the punches and do something interesting and unusual and different and so forth. So
Yeah.
instead of falling into a rut. We know that humor helps us engage our audience or just at least break the tension, if you will. Let's talk a little bit about a phrase you use a lot, which is called ethical influencer.
Mhm.
And I love that phrase. I use it a lot, and I say, my friend John Ball, you know, does the same thing I do, talks about ethical influencing. So what do you mean by that?
So there are lots of tools of influence and persuasion out there, and there are some amazing people who teach them as well. And there are also people teaching tools of influence and persuasion for other reasons. So you look at someone like Robert Cialdini or Robert Greene. They're very well-known names in the world of influence and persuasion. They've both written amazing books on the subject, and they really teach the tools as they've been able to see them of influence and persuasion. They're not the only people out there talking about these things. You know, other people are talking about them in other contexts. So you've got someone like Chris Voss who is talking about negotiation, which is very much a tool of influence and persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
And again, he's not the only person talking about that. Maria Konnikova is talking about in some of her recent books about the art of the con, essentially, and how
Mm-hmm.
people use influence and persuasion skills to trick people. And again, she's not the only person out there talking about that. These are just some recent books that have been very well, highly profiled, and in my opinion, are very good books to read as well. So the tools themselves have they're just tools. Like a hammer can be used to knock down a fence or to build a house, to build a wall, whatever it is. But you can use it to build or destroy. Same with most tools, they can be used for good or for bad. And so the tools themselves have no ethics, they have no morality. And it's the same with the tools of influence and persuasion. In fact, in Robert Cialdini's book, Persuasion, he talks about whether being questioned about whether it's ethical to even teach the tools of influence and persuasion to people who may be going out to use them unethically. But I think he rightly says that the people who want to use unethical persuasion and influence techniques on people are already doing it without having been taught. They've been figuring this stuff out or watching other other experts at work. They don't really need somebody to come and teach them this stuff. They've already been figuring it out for themselves. So they may not be able to so much write a book on it, but they're also not probably likely to be out there teaching it because they don't want people to be able to see what they do. So there are these things of some people are teaching just as tools without the sort of morality of whether it's good or bad, and some people are some people are actually teaching persuasion techniques for things like I don't know if we see so much with this now, but seduction coaching. I don't know if you've heard
Mm-hmm.
of this sort of branch of like neurolinguistic programming, and these people who personally I find it very sleazy. I think most people do. People who is essentially coaching for guys who just want to get laid as much as they can, and so they're using influence and persuasion techniques. They're using hidden tools to be able to talk their way into getting more women to sleep with them. And it's like, is that ethical? I would say not. And but ultimately, that there are things that are arguable about it, but it's kind of sleazy. And I would look at it from the point of view of, to me, teaching things within an ethical framework means that you are actually teaching them in the context of using them for the good of the people who you are using them on, not for your own personal gain, and so solely for your own profit or personal benefit.
I love that, the way you say that. I was just talking yesterday to a client who's trying to train one of the managers below her in the idea of servant leadership. And the manager, he's been made a manager and he doesn't really understand how to manage people. So my client is actually having to take extra time to teach him how. And she kept saying, it's not about you, it's not about your career. Your job as the manager is to serve your team and serve the company. That's why I call my business strategic speaking for results. What are the results you want to get? And with your seduction coaches, I guess it must be getting laid, but it's also, dating training. Maybe it's just learning how to connect with people, teaching people techniques that have worked or techniques that have not worked. But
Well,
in
yeah.
business, I mean, it's all about selling, selling a product or selling a service or selling an idea so that action, basically moving your listeners to take action.
Yeah.
And you were
Yeah,
about
very
to
much so.
say.
Well, I was going to say that the people who are teaching influence and persuasion skills and have been writing books about them for some years now, they didn't create them. They didn't.
Right.
They didn't come out of nowhere. These skills, these tools, if you like, have been around for a long time. And one of the places where you can definitely see them very, very much in action, and again, you can judge whether it's good or bad or not. But in religion, you can see it very much. And so anywhere where people need to be convinced of something, anywhere where there's an idea or a belief. So you can definitely see it in the world of politics. We have the whole area of rhetoric as initially taught by Aristotle, and most people are still greatly unaware of rhetorical devices that are still being very actively used in most politics today, and that are being used to get people on side or to get people just thinking in terms of catchphrases rather than deep and meaningful policy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's generally a case that most people are unaware of it, and that's I think one of my missions with it a bit is I feel when I discovered all of this, I had like most people, I had no idea, and when I started to discover all these sort of things that were going on, like behind the veil, when like it was like Dorothy sort of finding that the wizard was actually some old man pulling levers behind her in a box, not some big sort of scary figure. That you see it for what it really is. It is like taking the wool off your eyes and having the world revealed to you. And I feel that I want other people to have that as well. Not so that you'll never be influenced again, you will, but so that you at least have people can have awareness and empowerment as to whether they want to be, and also more likely to be able to see and potentially walk away or resist when anyone is trying to use influence and persuasion on them in unethical terms.
So this actually brings up another question I was thinking about, because I mean, if we talk about politics, we could be here all day and all night. So,
Yeah.
but yes, indeed, in politics, rhetoric and rhetorical tools are the sorts of things that are have been used for good and for not so good. And we've seen this pattern over years and years and years. Uh, what could we do, or should we do, if we see somebody using the tools of persuasion in a less than ethical fashion?
Mm-hmm. So firstly, we'd need to be able to know that they are doing that. So that requires having some level of awareness around what the tools and techniques of persuasion are. Whether that's having some basic level understanding of things like neurolinguistic programming, of things like the Cialdini's principles of persuasion, or Robert Greene's principles, laws. You need to have some level of understanding about what's actually at play and how people are doing it, and I would say even probably to some degree an understanding of basic understanding of rhetoric as well. You don't need to know all of the ancient names or the long sort of Latin titles of everything, but you do need to at least have some clues as to what's being used and how, and there are certainly very much go-to devices and techniques that are being used more commonly than other things. And so it starts with having a willingness to educate yourself, which most people probably don't have, to be honest,
Yeah.
because people just want to get on with their lives and don't really think too much about these things, or don't like to think that they're actually being controlled in any kind of way, shape, or form. And yet that's the reality. That's what I think is really the case of, like, we're not necessarily being mind controlled, although you could argue, depending on how you define mind control, you could argue yes, that these things are also used for levels of social engineering. And for example, everyone you see, I don't know what it's like where you are, but if someone's out in the street here and they're not wearing a mask at the moment, then the general feeling and attitude toward them is going to be very negative. and people will respond as such. And that's kind of like been socially engineered, that we all think we have to wear a mask, we have to be socially responsible. So when you see someone using anything of influence and persuasion unethically, the first thing probably you only really need to take a step back initially. Even if you don't have an education in what the tools of influence and persuasion are, you can still take a step back and ask yourself, what is this person's intention?
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually a good thing to ask, sometimes in one-to-one situations as much as in group situations. What is this person's intention? And are they actually giving me something solid here, or are they just telling me kind of what I want to hear, or trying to get me outraged or emotional? Because often it's emotional responses or distraction that people will try to get to persuade and get you on side with them, rather than actually addressing the issue. Sometimes even personal address or insult. An example would be, just recently I had somebody trying to scam me with a professional networking thing that was a absolute sham. And so it was actually something I'd responded to on a LinkedIn advert, and filled out this application to be accepted into this networking group, and then got this phone call from this lady, and she's telling me all about this. And I'm thinking, at some point on the phone call, I was thinking, okay, something's a bit fishy here. I already got something was a bit fishy. And then something clicked in me that said, any moment now she's going to ask me for payment, which is what happened. And she wanted me to pay, give my card details over the phone, which is always a red flag, right? And so I said, I'm not going to do that. You need to have a more secure payment system. And then she started getting angry because we just spent half an hour on the phone together, that I wouldn't trust her, and said, this is the only way to pay. I was like, well, you must have something I can look at. I'm not just going to invest several $100s into a networking scheme that I can't even take a look at or find anything online about. And she said, no, there's nothing. It's networking. And so, I think had I not had some awareness of how some people operate with these things, you get led along. They're telling you what you want to hear for about 30 minutes. It's all like, oh, what you're doing professionally is really good. Tell me more about this. And it was all really into me and telling me how great I am and like how good my profile looks. And so what a technique that is a form of love bombing, right? And so it's a technique that is often used by cult recruitment and by scammers as well, and even sometimes in people who are trying to get laid, just trying to get laid. It's telling, dishing out compliment after compliment, making people almost feel a bit like, oh wow, this is too amazing. And oh yeah, maybe I'm even better than I think I am. It's like, wow, thank you for looking at all this. Because you then don't want to go back to that person and say, I think you're trying to scam me.
Right.
And so that's where you're not. So it does require that you have to take that step back and think, what's actually going on here? Or I don't feel comfortable with this. Let's not go along with it. And let's be prepared to not even necessarily have a confrontation. Either hang up the phone if you're on a phone call, or walk away if you're in person, or just say, I need a minute to think about this, and then come back. Because most likely we're going to encounter those situations where we might want to do something about it in a more one-to-one or small group setting. And that's the point where we probably do need to challenge it and say, I'm not sure about what's going on here. What's your intention? What is this actually about? Or can you show me something a bit more that actually justifies this and isn't just your say so or your words? Because if the people then start to get angry, defensive, or even insulting to you for not going along with it, that's a very sure sign that it's that there's something wrong.
That's great. That's a great way to think about it. And basically, it's all about educating ourselves so that we can recognize when these techniques are being used.
Yeah.
And also be aware that you're being sold to. So, is it real or not? And that sort of thing. Yeah.
I don't know if you sort of see this ever online, but there are some people at the moment who are doing a lot of work on YouTube to uncover scams, and it's mainly to do with a lot of it's to do with like personal development courses or
Hmm.
property investing courses and forex trading courses and all these kinds of things, where these people sort of saying how wonderful they are, and they have their little video with they've hired a Lamborghini for the day and trying to make it look like they're super rich, all this kind of stuff. And they have these videos where they're essentially using a sales formula. There's a guy called Mike Winnett, if you ever check him out online. Very entertaining videos, but he has really described something called the entrepreneur formula, is what he calls it. And yet this is a sales sequence, if you like, that I can even remember being taught probably about
Hmm.
maybe 15 years ago or so. And the thing is, it's like, it does generally work, although less so now because more people are aware of it and it's been used so much. But also that it tends to be used mostly now by people who are trying to scam people into buying products. And so realistically, it's like even just knowing stuff like that, it's like one of the things I come across very often is people who've invested a lot of money in programs and courses, who've got very little back in return for it, or have ended up worse off financially afterwards from actually going ahead with some investment program, whether it's property or stock trading or something like that.
Yeah. Pyramid schemes are a great example of this. It's a sort of,
Yeah, there are still Ponzi schemes around as well, and
Ponzi
yeah.
schemes and so forth. Yeah, exactly. Well, now let's go back to ethical persuasion, because that's what you and I try to do. And
Yes.
that's what we teach people how to do. Uh, it does it does sound a little manipulative.
I don't
How
think
can
it.
we feel good about this?
I think manipulation is unavoidable. Ultimately, it comes down to, well, what's the intention behind it,
Hmm.
even then. And so this is why I say, when you take a step back and ask, what's this person's intention? Manipulation sounds like a terrible word, but we do it every day. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes just a small interaction with somebody manipulates them in a way, whether it's intentionally manipulating or not. We
Hmm.
manipulate things. We manipulate situations. If someone's feeling sad, we try and cheer them up, or we try and make them feel better with a hug or some kind words. Emotionally, that's a manipulation, but it's a positive one. So I think we need to sort of unravel that manipulation tends to be associated very negatively, but it really comes under, we can't avoid influencing and persuading in our lives, but we can be very conscious about how we do that. And so and the intention that we have, that we put out there. And I think generally, if you are actually in service to people, if you are actually looking to be for the benefit of your fellow person, of the greater good in general, then I don't think you're going to run into too many problems. It really is just when it starts to become about, well, what can I get out of this, or how can
Hmm.
I turn this to my advantage, sort of more Machiavellian kind of
Yeah.
things, that we move away from what we describe perhaps as ethical persuasion.
Yeah. I like to think, instead of manipulation, I think of it as strategy.
Yeah.
And that's easy because manipulation has gotten so many negative connotations these days. And indeed, it's everybody does. I mean, it's like, starts out, I'm thinking about, the cat manipulates me by looking at me and saying, and coming and rubbing against my ankle when I'm holding a piece of chicken. And, oh, they love me so much, and they just really want me to drop that piece of chicken. But yeah, that sort of thing.
Right.
There's so much to talk about this. Ladies and gentlemen, and anybody who's maybe not on the non-binary thing, anybody who's listening, dear listeners, please tune in to my podcast with John Ball that is on the Speakers Who Get Results list. It came out last week, so I highly recommend listening to it. And be sure to tune in tomorrow for a conversation about humor with Kelly Swanson. And in the meantime, you can hear about John and learn about John. We're going to post this on LinkedIn and on Facebook and eventually on YouTube so that you can follow him. John, meeting you at the beginning of this year, and as we were both sort of figuring out what we were doing with our podcast, was really just such a delight. I'm delighted to have been your guest. I'm delighted to have you as mine. And now I have you as my guest again. Yes, I have scored. So thank you so much, John. And we will, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you on the next